Check. Good to meet you. My name is Mike. Mike Check. Ah, yes. Bernie Sanders. Theo Bernie, bane of billionaires. Nemesis to weak centrists. Shouty old man, President Sanders. Despite the media blackout, he was all over the news for a big speech he gave in Queens, New York. It was so big, even the billionaire press couldn't keep away. Most of Sanders' speeches are an exercise in rote recital of humane policies. This speech was different. There was a moment that really stuck out. It's when Sanders did this.
Take a look around you and find someone you don't know. Maybe somebody who doesn't look kind of like you. Are you willing to fight for that person as much as you're willing to fight for yourself?
He was speaking to something desperately lacking in the capitalist world that we live in. Solidarity. Solidarity is incredibly important, and it's something that the left does not take seriously enough, even though the left is the only one explicitly talking about it. So let's talk about why that is and how we can fix it. Ellen DeGeneres, an old softball buddy of mine, recently went to a football game with George W. Bush, an old Yale buddy of mine. Many people were angry that a celebrity who claims the mantle of being a major LGBT representative would be so friendly with someone who made a strong push to ban gay marriage while he was president.
Today I want to explain why I support the Marriage Protection Amendment and why I'm urging Congress to pass it and send it to the states for ratification.
Not to mention killed 500,000 to 1 million Iraqis in cold blood and set climate and environmental policy back so far we may never recover as a species. In response to the outrage, Ellen released a video defending her friendship with Bush by saying,
I'm friends with George Bush. In fact, I'm friends with a lot of people who don't share the same beliefs that I have. We're all different, and I think that we've forgotten that that's okay that we're all different.
Hey, we disagree about some issues, but we should all be able to be civil and friendly with those that we disagree with. Many rich celebrities, like me, responded to Ellen's video with messages of what? Solidarity. Lots and lots and lots of solidarity. As a lot of leftists pointed out, this let's all get along civility scolding is really just a mask to cover up a lot of class solidarity among the rich. Rich liberals, after all, aren't very civil toward poor people. But rich liberals keep telling us that in order to live in a good society, we have to be polite to people who want to keep oppressing us and murdering us. This belief is integral to their class solidarity. And the rich have a lot of class solidarity. Do you? Yes. Today, if you're working class, which is basically everybody, the answer isn't really clear. The left likes to talk a lot about solidarity. Lots of lefties have an email signature that ends in solidarity. Or they get off on calling each other comrade. But the importance of solidarity, the real difficulty in building it these days, that has been disastrously underestimated. Our understanding of it, how to build it, how to nurture it, is too superficial given how important solidarity is to building mass movements. Part of this underestimation comes from the scale at which leftists like to think about and talk about problems. To define our terms, those on the left, people like democratic socialists, anarchists, Marxists, raccoons, like to talk about problems and solutions at the scale of the system. A lot of leftists reject explanations that only go as far as the individual or individual institutions. It's a big difference between Sanders and Warren, for instance. In Sanders' vision, the whole system is the problem. I wish I could do a Sanders voice. We need to change the whole bloody thing. We don't need to re-incentivize health insurance. We need Medicare for all. Carbon tax? No, we need a whole new energy system. Warren, on the other hand, assumes it's just a few corrupt apples tainting what's otherwise a pretty good system. We don't necessarily need Medicare for all. We just gotta figure out what's going wrong with these insurance companies. Liberals tend to prefer an individual analysis. Leftists tend to prefer systems level analysis. Psychology, the study of human individuals, has tended in some ways to be a more centrist discipline, while sociology, the study of human systems, has sometimes tended to be a more leftist discipline. It's why most liberals tend to think that the problem with the US is just Donald Trump, while leftists understand that it's all these big systemic problems like wealth inequality and the impunity of the rich that secreted Donald Trump into the world in the first place, and let Obama get away with similar stuff. When we're talking about something like overthrowing capitalism and replacing it with a whole new economic system, that's obviously a huge systemic problem, and we have to understand it at that level. But because these big systems and their big problems are ultimately human systems, and they're shaped and built by the individual neuroses and cognitive biases and emotional experience of human individuals, it would be a major blind spot on the left to abandon considering the individual in our analysis of problems. After all, it's only individuals coming together in large numbers that has ever been able to nudge these big systems in different directions. Whether it's abolitionists or suffragettes, labor organizers, civil rights activists, or environmentalists, or even resistance fighters, working together to overthrow big systems or nudge them in a better direction. It always comes down to the ability of individuals to work together. And figuring out how to get individuals to work together is not easy, as we all know. We all know that, right? Yes, right. Correct. Getting that coordination right is absolutely vital, especially right now. Life on Earth could literally depend on it. And there's one thing in particular that provides the adhesive, capable of keeping individuals together in coordinated groups. And that's the holy grail of the left.
This is the Holy Grail.
Solidarity. But given that the working class seems to have a lot less class solidarity than the rich do today, it's important that we take a lot more seriously how to build this thing that we like to fetishize. So let's talk about how to do that, finally. Some of the first mass movements of the modern era started with solidarity. It wasn't an afterthought. The causal relationship didn't go movement and then solidarity, or policy plan and then solidarity. It was the reverse. Solidarity was the genesis. It was the slimy, sweet ectoplasm from which the movements emerged. Factory worker strikes and coal miner strikes in the early 19th century were some of the first stirrings of the new labor movement. And these workers won some of the first battles to get better wages, shorter work days. Solidarity was absolutely essential to their success. And how did they build it? Part of it was due to the nature of the work itself. The kind of work done in these factories or these coal mines required workers to collaborate closely, and often away from the interference of bosses. This close collaboration created an esprit de corps, which is French, so you know it's nice. A sense of working together on a shared project in opposition to a hostile force, in this case the bosses, who still suck a lot. Living in cities also helped, which allowed workers to congregate together en masse, also French, and integral to forming the mass movements necessary to build power. Current Affairs recently published a very nice article by Nathaniel Matthews Trigg, which is also French, connecting the need for greater solidarity with the climate chaos now engulfing the globe. You should give it a read. There's a link in the description. The piece laid out some excellent examples from social psychological research on how to build in-group cohesion, which is basically a fancy word for class solidarity, but without the class connotations. Psychology, a little centrist. For instance, Nathaniel cites classic Muzaffar Sharif studies on conflict and cooperation. In the Middle Grove experiment, for example, researchers tried to pit groups of teenagers against each other, but the kids ultimately defied that artificial competition, having this shared struggle and this common antagonist, even after they've been artificially pit against one another, cooperated with each other against the more powerful adults, which is a good lesson for the Fox News age. But building this kind of in-group cohesion in a structured experiment is a lot easier than doing so in the world. That's especially true in this age of social fragmentation and alienation. In the early 80s, with the assault on unions and the breakdown in the manufacturing sector, workers have been deliberately isolated from one another. Many jobs, for instance in the service sector, use irregular hour scheduling so that workers will struggle to get to know one another. Or managers will seek to manufacture competition between workers. Our living spaces, too, are designed to atomize. Whether lonely apartments or single-family homes, the spaces we inhabit discourage bond building with people outside of our immediate kin groups. Meanwhile, because we're so drained from the many stresses of the world, from unfair jobs and unaffordable healthcare and crushing student debt, global existential crises like ecological collapse, we spend a lot of free time getting addicted to entertainment that is meant to ensnare our attention. And a lot of these stories that we consume are about the lone hero fighting against the collective, not the reverse, and reinforcing the individualistic myth of the Übermensch. On top of all this are the culture wars, very expertly manufactured by propaganda networks like Fox News, and even bought into by other propaganda networks like CNN and MSNBC. These culture wars have sown division among workers by forging these silly in-groups and out-groups based on cultural indicators like whether you drive a big truck or not. This has very effectively divided working class voters, who otherwise might be working together for better conditions, as they are doing with Bernie Sanders. There just aren't as many of the same kinds of opportunities for building worker solidarity as there were at the beginning of the modern era. Our work is more alienating, our lives more atomized, and these cultural obstacles more deeply ingrained. So how do we battle these huge forces and build real solidarity among workers? There are three very important things. They're already happening, but not nearly enough. The first, clubs. A lot of dollars flow to political campaigns, and I don't just mean electoral campaigns. I also mean demonstrations, marches, protests, getting members to pay dues or vote on resolutions, organizing conferences, committee work. What kind of psychopath enjoys committee work? Meanwhile, far too little resources go to organizing events and groups that are not explicitly utilitarian, predicated on achieving some goal. The women's suffrage movement, for example, benefited greatly from women's clubs, whose members built relationships, built solidarity, and built standing in the communities, ultimately built power by hanging out and doing fun things. And it's important to mention also doing not fun things like being exceptionally racist. Book clubs, religious clubs, music clubs, or bands, I guess. Knitting clubs, gun clubs, hell, fight clubs. Say what you will about the movie, but it portrayed building working class male solidarity better than most, even if it was satirical and gratuitously violent, and basically devoid of women. I know this kind of thing is happening all over the place, but it's not enough. We need more. Projects like starting a community garden, community solar, housing co-ops, community land trusts, and other means of generating basic necessities in a cooperatively owned way is another way to build solidarity. Number two, alliances. Nonprofits like to build coalitions and networks, but they tend to stay in their lanes. Environmental groups build environmental coalitions. Leftist groups create leftist coalitions. But there's a lot of room for groups from different issues to be working together more closely. On the same day that the climate group Extinction Rebellion launched their Rebellion Day in spring of 2019 in London, an anti-racism demonstration was taking place elsewhere in London and had a much larger turnout. Why were they in different parts of the city? They're both ultimately about building power to overthrow a violent ruling class. The movie Pride is very cute, you should check it out. It's about the true story of a coal miner union joining together with an LGBT rights group in solidarity and helping each other achieve the other's ends. In the movie, the LGBT group went out of their way to raise money for the coal miners union for no other reason than to just build solidarity with them. Even though there were homophobic coal miners and significant cultural differences between the two, and apparently unrelated goals, that one selfless act by the LGBT group built a foundation of trust, which then facilitated time spent together, which grew into mutual fondness, which built the solidarity that allowed both groups to achieve many of their goals. And ultimately, it showed the homophobic miners that gay people are indeed people, changing the culture of the coal miners union in the process. On the same day as Extinction Rebellion's Declaration Day, which was in October 2018, the Yellow Vest movement was born in France. These groups and their battles are always depicted in the media as separate, but they're not. They're the same movement. Today in the US, there's a lot of cultural animosity between coal miners and environmentalists. There doesn't have to be. And the process of building solidarity between them can start with one group reaching out. Imagine it. Greenpeace and DSA's Eco-Socialist Working Group grabbing beers with the teachers union. Where's my beer? Climate Justice Alliance and a firefighters union planting a forest together. There's so many crossovers possible. We can't let the neoliberal divide and conquer strategy continue working. Number three, stories. Speaking of crossovers, something the left hasn't been very good at lately is building a mythology. Marx did a great job, for instance, of telling a compelling story about how the world works, and the left is still resting on his labor, ironically. The left has been so focused on just getting the facts right, or on building theory, or on difficult scholarly work and being clever, which is great, that it has abdicated an essential facet of building movements and winning power, controlling and constructing narratives. And I don't just mean the Machiavellian kind of control the narrative that you hear in Aaron Sorkin dialogue about manipulating voters or whatever, but also creating fictional stories that show the possibility of victory and communicate egalitarian value. A study by Calvert W. Jones and Celia Paris found that fiction plays an incredibly important role in shaping people's notion of what's politically possible and even what's politically desirable. Fiction has an outsized impact on what people believe to be true about the world, even when they know what they're consuming is a fictional story. For example, you watch a show or read a book like Handmaid's Tale, and you know what you're reading is fiction. You know the stories are made up, you know the world is made up. But because it resembles the world, because the problems are familiar, because you've seen these kinds of power structures play out in your own life, that story can impact what you value or what you prioritize or the kinds of political threats that seem more real. It's because people live their lives according to, yes, material realities, but also stories. Those on the right have a huge mythology that's built by the narratives constructed by Fox News and talk radio, and a vast YouTube network of Nazis and quasi-Nazis. But the right also has a huge literary canon. Ayn Rand is probably the most famous example of that. But in a recently published New Republic piece, Ian Allen discusses the vast fringe literature that is building an apocalyptic right-wing mythology. But even a lot of mainstream films and stories pander to a right-wing view of the world. For example, Batman. Some aspects of the Dark Knight trilogy were good and fine and fun, whatever. But the idea of a benevolent billionaire using high-tech military weaponry to subdue criminals, like those vaguely using populist rhetoric, is a very friendly and convenient fantasy for the rich and the right-wing vanguard that protects them. The left doesn't really have this. The literary world today, from lowbrow to highbrow, tends to be either depoliticized, right-wing friendly, or some version of tepid liberalism. It's rare to see leftist values depicted in mainstream films, or captured positively in capital L literature. A fascist Milosevic apologist who denies the Serbian genocide just won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Integral to building solidarity is a set of shared stories and images, characters and archetypes, around which people can bond, can come together from different backgrounds to apply a shared sense of meaning. Look at the ubiquity of Guy Fawkes masks from V for Vendetta, or more recently the Joker makeup in Chilean protests. Dull, gray reality, or even vibrant, beautiful reality, isn't quite enough. We need the frames of mythology. If the left continues to focus mostly or entirely on large-scale analyses, without really considering the individual, continues to put most of its attention on organizing around conferences and working groups and meetings, continues to build siloed movements all disconnected from one another, then it will continue to take solidarity for granted. And if we fail to build strong and broad solidarity, we'll lose all of our battles. Not just to our own peril, but to everybody's.
It is your sacred task to seek this grail.
So it comes back to Bernie Sanders and his question. Who are you willing to fight for?
We're bringing our people together, black and white and Latino, Native American, Asian American, gay and straight. Our people are coming together for justice and dignity.